Some say sadness inspires, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to hear that much of Tchaikovsky's life, like his most popular music, is filled with a tragic air and melancholy. But what exactly was so tragic about Tchaikovsky's life? After all, he was in his day, and remains, Russia's most honored composer. He was greatly admired as a musician during his lifetime, and his funeral was attended by more people than any other in St. Petersburg's storied history. Today, Tchaikovsky's music may be the most enduring of all classical composers. Many of his compositions have timelessly permeated modern society's musical psyche. The playing of the Nutcracker Suite has become a Christmas tradition. Swan Lake is celebrated as a great, if not the greatest, ballet. The 1812 overture, including the actual cannon blasts Tchaikovsky scored, is still considered one of the most rousing and dynamic pieces of music ever composed. The stirring and romantic style of his Sixth Symphony has been imitated in countless movie scores, and the Romeo and Juliet Overture has a tragic air and energy that ascends to the same plateau as Shakespeare's original tragedy. At first glance, in life and in death, Tchaikovsky seems to have had it all, but the truth is far from that. The problem was that for all his life, Tchaikovsky was burdened and even haunted by the shroud of his own sexuality, specifically his homosexuality. In his mind, and in the minds of most in the 19th century world, Tchaikovsky saw his sexuality as a curse and the result of some loathsome abnormality. He spent his entire life trying to overcome it, on one occasion begging his younger brother, Modest, also homosexual, to try to be normal, for if not, he too would descend into the depravity, torment, and ruin that Tchaikovsky believed his own life had become. Indeed, Tchaikovsky's own inability to force himself into normalcy led to a lifetime marked by severe bouts of suicidal depression and emotional flagellation. "My whole life has been a chain of misfortunes because of my sexuality," he once drearily wrote. But he concealed it well. Few of his contemporaries knew about the secret, tortured life he led, and his homosexuality was hidden from the public by both Russian and Soviet authorities until the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So it stands to reason that during his life, Tchaikovsky faced a number of agonizing situations where he was unable to profess or pursue a love that may jeopardize his most dark and carefully guarded secret. In fact, it was this very notion of tragic and impossible love that led to what is generally considered his first masterpiece and one of his greatest compositions, a musical overture to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. In the spring of 1869, Tchaikovsky was 29. Although an accepted member of Moscow's elite musical circle, he had yet to produce a composition that received great public acclaim or unanimous peer adulation. But when his close friend and fellow musician, Maily Balakirev, recommended that he try to write an overture to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, it was exactly the subject and inspiration Tchaikovsky had been waiting for. At the time, Tchaikovsky was hopelessly in love with one of his students, a young man named Edward Zach. It was a doomed relationship, made impossible by both sexual morals and a criminally vast age difference. Zach was only 15 when they met, and yet Tchaikovsky impetuously and obsessively pursued the affair. Ironically, in writing the score to a theme of tragic and impossible love, Tchaikovsky was recounting as much the story of his own life as he was the fictional Romeo and Juliet's. 4 years later, Zach would take his own life, disappearing into a shroud of mystery. Very little is known about Tchaikovsky's relationship with Zach, and even less is known about the young man's own life. Still, it is clear from Tchaikovsky's journal entries that he was very much attached to the young man. His melodramatic confessions of love and despair stretch nearly 20 years after the fact, and from these entries it is clear that Tchaikovsky mourned and blamed himself for the young man's suicide. The tragedy of this episode in Tchaikovsky's life has been forever encased in his overture to Romeo and Juliet, generally considered to be his first masterpiece. The overture is a daring and moving musical adaptation of Shakespeare's play, from the beautiful love theme to the sudden shifts in the score that trace the events of the story and lead to its dramatic conclusion and tragedy, a tragedy that sadly underscored most of the composer's life.